The grandfather clock in the corner of the Vandergraaf ballroom had just struck midnight when Serafina Ashmont made her decision.
We must leave
Tonight
now.
would be her final
the others
appearance
will
in New
see.
York society.
Trust me.
At 31,
do.
she had endured 13 years of rejection, mockery, and deliberate cruelty, and she simply could not bear another moment of it. She sat alone in the alcove that had become her customary refuge at these gatherings, a shadowy corner where the wallflowers and forgotten spinsters were relegated far from the glittering center of the ballroom, where eligible young ladies danced with handsome gentlemen. Her plain brown silk gown, carefully mended and altered to hide its age, seemed to absorb the light, rather than reflect it, making her nearly invisible among the potted palms and marble statuary. The book of poetry in her lap, Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, had been her shield against the endless hours of being ignored or worse, actively mocked. She had read the same passage 3 times without comprehending a single word, her mind too occupied with the logistics of her escape from this gilded prison. Tomorrow she would write to her cousin Margaret in Boston. The position as governess to Margaret's 4 children would be waiting. It meant exile from the only city she had ever known, a kind of social death, but it would be preferable to enduring any more nights like this one. Look at her, Lady Henrietta Vandergraaf's voice carried clearly across the space between them, pitched just loud enough for Serafina to hear every poisonous word. Still attending balls at her age. One would think she'd have accepted reality by now. Quite pathetic, really, Mrs. Harriet Pemberton agreed with obvious satisfaction. Her enormous diamond necklace caught the chandelier light as she leaned closer to her companion. 31, and still harboring delusions that some gentleman might suddenly discover her charms. The poor creature doesn't seem to understand that some women are simply not meant for marriage. Serafina's fingers tightened on the book, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. She had learned long ago not to react to such comments, not to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing how deeply their words wounded her. Her face remained perfectly composed, a mask she had perfected over years of practice. The truth was that Serafina Ashmont had once been different. At 18, she had possessed a quiet beauty and gentle manner that had attracted several respectable suitors. Her family had been well regarded, her father a successful real estate investor with a comfortable fortune. She had received 5 proposals of marriage in her debut season. That was before the scandals began. First, her father's investment fraud had surfaced, revealing years of financial manipulation that had destroyed dozens of families. Then her brother Cassian had been caught in a cheating scheme at an Atlantic City gambling house, and the duel that followed had left a senator's son critically wounded and Cassian fleeing to Paris in permanent exile. Finally, her mother had been discovered in a very public affair with a married congressman. One by one, Serafina's suitors had disappeared. Invitations had stopped arriving. Friends had begun crossing the street to avoid her. And Serafina had found herself transformed from a promising young lady into society's most pitiable spinster. Now she existed on the periphery of New York's elite, tolerated only because her Aunt Octavia Thornwell insisted on including her niece in social gatherings. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice the sudden change in the ballroom's atmosphere until a deep, cultured voice spoke directly to her. "Miss Ashmont, I believe." Serafina's eyes flew open. Her book tumbled from her lap as she found herself staring up at the most imposing man she had ever encountered. Dominic Ravencrest stood before her like something from a fairy tale. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with austere handsomeness that spoke of generations of refined breeding. His dark hair was touched with distinguished silver at the temples. His steel-gray eyes held an intelligence that was both intimidating and compelling. At 38, he was perhaps the most powerful man in New York. His fortune was estimated at $50 million, built on a railroad empire that stretched from Boston to Chicago. He had been widowed for 5 years, and society had been waiting ever since for him to choose a new wife. He had never in 5 years asked any woman to dance. Until now. "Your Grace," Serafina stammered, struggling to rise. Yes, I am, Miss Ashmont, though I confess I am surprised that you know my name. I make it my business to know the names of everyone present at these gatherings." Dominic replied, his voice like aged whiskey, smooth, rich, with underlying warmth. "Though I must admit, I have been particularly curious about you." "Curious about me?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I cannot imagine why." "Because," Dominic said, his eyes holding hers with startling intensity, "in a room full of people desperately trying to attract attention, you are the only one who seems content to remain unnoticed. I find that intriguing." Before Serafina could formulate a response, Dominic extended his hand toward her with the same courtesy he might show to a duchess. "Miss Ashmont," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the ballroom, "would you honor me with a dance?" The words seemed to echo in the silence. 300 of New York's elite stood frozen watching this impossible scene unfold. Lady Vandergraff stood with her mouth hanging open. Mrs. Pemberton appeared to be choking on her champagne. "Your Grace, there must be some mistake," Serafina whispered. "Surely you intended to ask someone else." "No mistake," Dominic replied firmly. "I am asking you, Miss Serafina Ashmont, to dance with me. Will you accept—" Serafina stared at his outstretched hand. She was acutely aware of shocked whispers spreading through the ballroom of incredulous stares and barely concealed gasps. Genevieve Aldridge, the blonde beauty who had been considered the season's most likely candidate for Dominic's attention, looked as though she had been struck by lightning. "I—" Serafina began, then stopped. In Dominic's eyes, she saw something that made her decision. Not pity, not curiosity, but a kind of recognition, as though he were seeing something in her that no one else had bothered to look for. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, Your Grace, I would be honored." The moment her gloved hand touched his, Serafina felt as though an electric current had passed between them. Dominic's fingers were strong and warm as he led her toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd parted before them. Every face reflected varying degrees of shock, curiosity, and speculation. The orchestra began a new waltz. The other dancers cleared the floor, creating a wide circle around them. "You're trembling," Dominic observed quietly as he placed his hand at her waist. "I'm terrified," Serafina admitted honestly. "I haven't danced in it's been years, Your Grace. I'm certain to embarrass both of us." "And then we shall be embarrassed together," Dominic said, and the smile that accompanied his words made her heart race. "Though I suspect you underestimate yourself, Miss Ashmont." He was right. Despite her fears, Serafina's body remembered the lessons of her youth. As they swept across the polished floor, she felt as though she were flying rather than dancing. The hundreds of candles seemed to set the air itself aglow. "You dance beautifully," Dominic said. "I was right to trust my instincts about you." "Your instincts, Your Grace. I have been watching you this evening, Miss Ashmont." His confession was delivered in a low, intimate tone. "Watching the way you carry yourself with dignity despite the cruelty of others. The way you find solace in literature rather than gossip. The way you observe the world around you with intelligence and compassion. These are rare qualities." Serafina felt tears prickling at her eyes. No one had spoken to her this way in years. "Your Grace, you are very kind, but I fear you see qualities in me that don't truly exist." "On the contrary," Dominic replied, "I believe you consistently underestimate your own worth. Tell me, Miss Ashmont, what do you see when you look in the mirror?" The question caught her off guard. It was too personal for polite conversation, but there was something in his expression that made her answer honestly. "I see a woman who has been weighed and found wanting, Your Grace. A spinster, past her prime, marked by scandal, suitable only for the shadows." "Then you need better mirrors," Dominic said firmly, his hand tightening at her waist. "Because I see a woman of remarkable strength who has endured years of undeserved cruelty with grace and dignity. I see intelligence, compassion, and a beauty that has everything to do with character." The music wound toward its conclusion. As the last notes faded, Dominic led her back toward the edge of the ballroom, but he didn't release her hand. "Miss Ashmont," he said, "might I ask what brings you to these gatherings where you are so poorly treated?" "My aunt, Lady Thornwell, requires a companion. I attend at her request." "And if you had a choice—" "No," Serafina admitted. "If I had a choice, I would never set foot in a ballroom again. Tonight was to be my last appearance. I've decided to accept a position in Boston as governess to my cousin's children." Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment perhaps. "Miss Ashmont," he said softly, "might I propose an alternative?" Before she could ask what he meant, an elderly woman approached them. Octavia Thornwell had been watching with an expression that combined bewilderment and barely concealed excitement. "Your Grace," Lady Thornwell said with a deep curtsy, "what an extraordinary honor you have bestowed upon my niece this evening." "The honor has been entirely mine, Lady Thornwell," Dominic replied. "Your niece is a remarkable young woman, and I have requested permission to call upon her tomorrow afternoon. I trust you would have no objection." Lady Thornwell's mouth opened and closed several times. "Your Grace, that is, of course, we would be most honored." "Excellent." Dominic raised Serafina's hand to his lips for a brief kiss that nonetheless sent a jolt through her entire body. "Miss Ashmont, shall we say 3 o'clock?" 3 o'clock would be perfect, Your Grace." "Until tomorrow, then." His eyes held hers for one more long moment. "I look forward to our meeting with great anticipation." As he disappeared into the crowd, Serafina stood frozen. The ballroom had erupted into a frenzy of whispered conversations. 300 people who had ignored her for years were now staring with undisguised curiosity. "Seraphina, my dear," Lady Thornwell said, gripping her niece's arm, "I believe we must discuss what gown you shall wear tomorrow. Mr. Ravencrest is calling upon you." I can hardly believe it. But Seraphina was barely listening. Her mind was reeling from the impossible transformation that had taken her from the shadows to the center of attention in the space of a single dance. For the first time in years, Seraphina Ashmont felt visible. The spinster scorned by high society had somehow captured the attention of the most powerful man in America, and her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As their carriage pulled away from the mansion, Seraphina looked back at the illuminated windows. She thought of the alcove where she had sat forgotten. She thought of the ladies who had mocked her. And she thought of Dominic Ravencrest, whose eyes had seen her when no one else had bothered to look. Tomorrow he would come to call. Tomorrow everything would be different. The night air was cool against her flushed cheeks. The gaslights along Fifth Avenue created pools of warm light in the darkness. Somewhere she could hear carriage wheels on cobblestones, the clip-clop of horses' hooves. But nothing felt normal anymore. Everything had changed. As the carriage carried her through darkened streets toward home, Seraphina touched her hand where his lips had brushed against her glove, and she smiled. For the first time in years, she smiled with genuine happiness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own uncertainties. But tonight she would simply hold this moment close and treasure it. The invisible woman had danced, and in dancing had become visible at last. And in a world that had tried so hard to erase her, that was nothing short of a miracle. Seraphina woke the next morning with the disorienting sensation that she had dreamed it all. But as she sat up, the events came flooding back with crystalline clarity. She could still feel the strength of Dominic's hand at her waist, still hear the warmth in his voice. "Seraphina." Lady Thornwell's voice rang through the house. "Come quickly. We have much to discuss before Mr. Ravencrest arrives." The reality hit like a physical blow. Dominic was indeed coming to call. What did one wear when receiving the wealthiest man in New York? How did one behave? She dressed quickly in her best morning gown, a simple dress of deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes. It was 3 years old, carefully maintained, but it was the finest thing she owned. Downstairs, she found her aunt in a state of barely controlled panic, surveying their modest drawing room with dismay. "The furniture is so shabby," her aunt exclaimed, wringing her hands. "What will he think?" "Aunt," Seraphina said gently, "I'm certain Mr. Ravencrest is not coming to inspect our furnishings. If he wishes to call upon me, he must already be aware of our modest circumstances." "But Seraphina, you must understand what this means. Mr. Ravencrest has shown you particular attention. This could change everything for our family." Seraphina felt that familiar knot of anxiety. She had spent so many years being disappointed that she couldn't allow herself to believe his interest was anything more than a momentary whim. "Aunt, please don't read too much into this. Mr. Ravencrest was merely being kind. I'm certain his call today is nothing more than a polite gesture. Nonsense men like Dominic Ravencrest do not dance with spinsters out of mere politeness." But Seraphina had learned not to trust in hope. It was safer to assume his interest would prove temporary. The hours until 3 o'clock passed with agonizing slowness. Seraphina changed her dress twice, rearranged her hair 3 times. She studied herself in the mirror, trying to see whatever had caught his attention. What she saw was a woman of 31 with pleasant but unremarkable features. Chestnut brown hair that had lost the shine of youth. Green eyes that held too much sadness. A figure neither fashionably slender nor attractively voluptuous. She was ordinary, forgettable, and entirely unsuitable for a man like Dominic Ravencrest. At precisely 3 o'clock, the sound of an elegant carriage announced his arrival. When he entered their small drawing room, his tall frame seemed to fill the modest space. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored coat of dark blue, superfine, his silver-touched hair gleaming. "Miss Ashmont," he said, and his eyes found hers immediately. "How lovely you look this afternoon. That shade of green is particularly becoming." "Mr. Ravencrest," Seraphina replied with a curtsy. "How kind of you to call. Please, won't you sit down?" Dominic settled into the indicated chair with natural grace. "I trust you slept well after last evening's festivities." Yes, thank you," Seraphina replied, though the truth was she had barely slept at all. "I'm glad to hear it." He leaned forward slightly. "I confess I found myself thinking about our conversation long into the night, about what you said when I asked what you see in the mirror." Her heart skipped a beat. She had assumed he would want to discuss pleasant trivialities. "Mr. Ravencrest, Please," he interrupted gently, "call me Dominic. I think we can dispense with excessive formality." Dominic, she repeated, and the name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate. I'm not certain that would be appropriate. Perhaps not by society's standards, but I've never been particularly concerned with what society deems appropriate. I'm more interested in what's real, what's honest. And I'd very much like to have an honest conversation with you, Serafina. May I call you Serafina? The use of her full given name spoken in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. No one called her Serafina anymore. Yes, if you wish. Montirafina, Dominic said, and the way he spoke her name made it sound beautiful. I want to be very direct with you if you'll permit me. I didn't ask to call on you today out of politeness. I asked because I find myself genuinely intrigued by you and I'd like to know you better. But why I'm nobody? I have no fortune, no position, nothing but scandal attached to my name. Who would what? Dominic interrupted, standing and beginning to pace. It was the first time she had seen him display anything other than perfect composure. Flatter me. Tell me what they think I want to hear. I've had 5 years of that, Serafina, and it holds no interest for me. He returned to his chair, leaning forward intently. Do you know what I observed last night? I watched you sit in that corner for 2 hours before I approached. I watched the way you ignored cruel comments from women who aren't fit to speak your name. I watched you read Wollstonecraft, and yes, I recognized the book with genuine absorption. I watched you treat the servants with kindness when you thought no one was looking. And I thought here finally is someone real, someone with substance, someone worth knowing. Serafina felt tears gathering. No one had spoken to her this way in years. You make me sound far better than I am. I don't think so. I think you've been told you're worthless for so long that you've started to believe it. But I see something different. I see a woman who has survived years of cruelty without becoming cruel herself. That takes remarkable strength of character. Or remarkable stubbornness, Serafina said with a weak smile. Perhaps both, Dominic allowed, and his answering smile transformed his face. Now I have a confession. Last night was not the first time I've seen you. I've been observing you for several weeks now at 4 different social events. Her eyes widened. You've been watching me, but why didn't you? Because I needed to be certain that what I saw was real and not some performance. I've become quite skilled at detecting artifice. And what did you conclude? That you're the most genuinely intelligent, compassionate woman I've encountered in 5 years. That you have opinions about things that matter, philosophy, politics, social reform. That you care about ideas, not just fashion and gossip. And that despite everything society has done to you, you've maintained your dignity. He paused. At the first event, I saw you reading John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. At the second, I overheard you discussing women's education with your aunt. At the third, I watched you give a substantial tip to a servant, money I suspect you could ill afford. And last night, I saw you sit alone, rather than compromise your principles by joining in the mockery of others. Serafina was overwhelmed. The idea that he had been observing her, seeing her when she thought herself invisible was almost too much to process. I don't know what to say. Then let me say something instead. I'd like to propose something to you, Serafina. I'd like to court you, properly and publicly. I'd like to take you driving in Central Park tomorrow afternoon during the fashionable hour where all of society can see us together. But the scandal, my family's reputation, is not your fault and does not define you, Dominic said firmly. Your father's crimes, your brother's mistakes, your mother's choices, none of these are your responsibility. You were 18 years old when those events occurred. The idea that you should be punished for them years later is both cruel and unjust. Society doesn't see it that way. Then society is wrong, and I have no intention of letting society's prejudices dictate my choices. Serafina looked into his eyes and saw absolute sincerity. Why? She asked again. Why would you risk your reputation for me? Dominic was quiet, considering. When he spoke, his voice was soft but intense. Because I loved my first wife, Serafina, but I was never truly alive with her. Isabel was beautiful, accomplished, from the right family. She gave me everything society said I should want. But we never talked, not really. We never challenged each other intellectually. We never shared ideas or debated philosophy. When she died, I mourned her. But I also realized that I had been lonely even when she was alive. He refocused on Serafina. These past 5 years, I've been pursued by 100 women. They offer me beauty connections, heirs, but not one has offered what I saw in you last night, genuine intelligence, authentic character, the kind of partnership I've been yearning for. You don't want my money, you already had suitors before your family's fall. You don't want my position. If you did, you wouldn't have planned to flee to Boston. So what you offer me is something infinitely more valuable yourself, your real self, and that is worth any amount of social speculation. Tears spilled down her cheeks now. For years she had been invisible, dismissed, treated as less than human. And here was this extraordinary man telling her that she was valuable. I'm afraid, she whispered. I'm afraid to hope. I'm afraid that you'll realize your mistake and walk away like all the others did. Dominic stood and crossed to where she sat. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his, and the gesture was so unexpected from such a powerful man that it took her breath away. Then let me prove it to you, he said. Let me show you day by day that I'm not going anywhere. Give me the chance to earn your trust, Serafina. That's all I'm asking. A chance. Serafina looked down at him, at this man who had everything kneeling before her like a supplicant. She thought of the years of loneliness, of slow death by 1,000 small cruelties. She thought of her decision to flee to Boston, and she thought of the waltz of the feeling of being seen for the first time in over a decade. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, she asked, her voice trembling. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, Dominic confirmed. Central Park during the fashionable hour where everyone will see us. Exactly. No hiding, no shame. I want the world to know I'm courting you. Serafina took a deep breath. She stood at the edge of a precipice. She could step back into safety, into familiar misery, or she could step forward into the terrifying possibility of hope. Yes, she said finally. Yes, Dominic, I'll drive with you tomorrow. I'll give you the chance to prove your sincerity. But I need you to understand I can't survive another disappointment. If you're going to change your mind, do it now. I won't change my mind, Dominic said with absolute conviction. He rose, bringing her hands to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I promise you, Serafina, I am not going anywhere. As Dominic took his leave, Serafina stood at the window and watched his carriage disappear. Her hands were still trembling, her heart racing with terror and exhilaration. Lady Thornwell appeared at her elbow. Well, what did he say? He's taking me driving tomorrow, in Central Park, during the fashionable hour. Oh, my dear girl. Her aunt gripped her arm. Do you know what this means? He's making a public declaration. This is serious courtship. I know, Serafina said quietly, and I'm terrified. Aristocratic, why? Because for the first time in years, I'm allowing myself to hope, and hope is the most dangerous thing in the world. But even as she spoke the words, she could feel something unfurling in her chest. Something that had been dormant for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like. It was possibility. The following afternoon, dressed in a gown of sapphire blue that her aunt had somehow procured overnight, Serafina heard carriage wheels outside. Through the window, she saw Dominic's elegant phaeton, drawn by matched chestnut horses. Are you ready, my dear? Lady Thornwell asked, adjusting the pearl necklace at Serafina's throat. No, Serafina admitted, but I'm going anyway. As she stepped outside, Dominic turned to look at her, and the expression on his face took her breath away. It was genuine admiration. Serafina, he said, helping her into the high seat, you look absolutely radiant. You're too kind. Not kind, Dominic corrected as he took up the reins. Truthful, there's a difference. As they drove towards Central Park, Serafina was acutely aware of curious stares from passers-by. Word of last night's dance had clearly spread. People stopped on sidewalks to watch them pass. Ignore them, Dominic said quietly. Their opinions matter far less than they believe. They entered Central Park, and Serafina's breath caught. The fashionable hour was in full display. Dozens of carriages, ladies in their finest gowns, gentlemen in their best attire, everyone engaged in the daily ritual of seeing and being seen. And there, driving through the center of it all, was Dominic with Serafina at his side. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Fans fluttered frantically. More than one gentleman nearly fell from his horse while staring. Your Grace, Mr. Ravencrest, a female voice called out. Genevieve Aldridge had maneuvered to intercept them. Dominic brought his horses to a polite halt. Miss Aldridge, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Genevieve was even more beautiful in daylight. Her blonde hair gleamed like spun gold beneath a fashionable hat. Her dress was the latest Paris fashion. Her blue eyes were wide and innocent, but Serafina could see the calculation behind them. How delightful to see you, Genevieve said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. And Miss Ashmont, what a surprise. I had no idea you were still attending social functions. How very brave of you. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Serafina felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and anger. But before she could formulate a response, Dominic spoke. Miss Aldridge, I'm so glad we encountered you. It saves me the trouble of making a general announcement. As you can see, I'm courting Miss Ashmont. I'd appreciate it if you'd help spread the word among your circle that any discourtesy shown to her will be taken as a personal insult to me. I trust that's clear enough." The smile froze on Genevieve's face. Around them, other carriages had slowed occupants straining to hear every word. "I, of course, Mr. Ravencrest," Genevieve stammered. "I meant no offense. I'm sure you didn't," Dominic replied, his tone suggesting he was sure of exactly the opposite. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Ashmont and I were having a private conversation." "Good day, Miss Aldridge." He guided the horses forward, leaving Genevieve sitting with her mouth hanging open. "You didn't have to do that," Serafina said quietly. "Defending me so publicly, it will only make people more curious." "Good," Dominic replied firmly. "Let them gossip. Let them talk. I want there to be absolutely no doubt about my intentions or my regard for you, Serafina." "But why?" The question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you doing this? You could have any woman in New York. Why choose me with all my disadvantages?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, guiding the horses around a curve. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Do you know what I've learned in 38 years, Serafina? That wealth and position don't protect you from loneliness. That you can be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. That you can have everything society says you should want and still feel empty inside." He glanced at her. "I've spent 5 years being pursued by women who want what I have, not who I am. Women who see a fortune and a name, not a man. And I've spent those same 5 years wondering if I would ever find someone I could actually talk to, someone who would challenge me intellectually, someone who would be a true partner rather than just a beautiful ornament. And you think I could be that person? I think you already are that person. Last night when we danced, when we talked, that was the first genuine conversation I've had in 5 years. You didn't flatter me or try to tell me what you thought I wanted to hear. You were real. You were honest. And that is infinitely more valuable to me than beauty or fortune or social position." Tears gathered in her eyes again. "I'm afraid that this is too good to be true, that I'll wake up and discover it was all a dream." "Then let me make it real," Dominic said. He brought the phaeton to a stop in a quieter section of the park. Turning to face her fully, he took her hand. "Serafina, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm simply asking for time. Time to court you properly. Time to prove to you that my interest is genuine and lasting. Time for us to discover whether this connection we both feel might develop into something more. Will you give me that time?" Serafina looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. "Yes, Dominic, I'll give you that time. I'll let you court me, but you need to know I won't become someone I'm not to please you or society. I won't pretend to be less intelligent or less opinionated or less myself." A slow smile spread across his face. "Serafina, I wouldn't want you any other way. Your intelligence, your opinions, your authentic self, those are precisely what I'm courting. Don't ever diminish yourself for me or anyone else." As he guided the horses back toward the main drive, Serafina felt something shift inside her. For years, she had been invisible, had made herself small and quiet in an attempt to avoid further pain. But Dominic was offering her something different. He was offering her the chance to be seen, fully seen exactly as she was. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And it was exactly what she had been waiting for all along. As they completed their circuit of the park, acknowledging the stares and whispers with quiet dignity, Serafina made a decision. She would stop hiding. She would stop making herself invisible. She would take the risk of being seen, of being known, of being vulnerable. Because if there was even a chance that Dominic's interest was real, it was worth the risk of hope. The week following Serafina's public drive with Dominic passed in a blur of unprecedented social attention. Invitations that had stopped arriving years ago suddenly flooded their modest household. Ladies who had cut her dead on the street now smiled and waved. It was bewildering, vindicating, and deeply satisfying to watch the same people who had mocked her suddenly scramble to curry her favor. On the fourth day, Serafina received an invitation that made her hands tremble. Mrs. Caroline Astor requested her presence at the weekly Thursday afternoon tea. "This is it," Lady Thornwell breathed. "An invitation from Mrs. Astor. If she accepts you, everyone will accept you. If she rejects you, I have to go," Serafina said quietly. "Dominic has put his reputation on the line for me. The least I can do is face society with dignity." The Astor Mansion was a monument to wealth and taste. As Serafina was announced and entered the drawing room where 40 of New York's most influential women had gathered, she felt every eye turned toward her with predatory interest. Mrs. Astor herself sat in a throne-like chair near the fireplace, a woman in her 60s who radiated authority. Her steel-gray hair was perfectly coiffed, her black silk gown impeccable. "Miss Ashmont," Mrs. Astor said, her voice carrying clearly, "how good of you to join us. Please take a seat here beside me." Serafina crossed the room on trembling legs, acutely aware of whispered conversations erupting in her wake. She settled into the indicated chair. "Tell me, Miss Ashmont," Mrs. Astor began, and Serafina recognized the tone immediately. This was an interrogation. "I understand your father was involved in that unfortunate stock manipulation scandal some years ago. How difficult that must have been for you." The comment was delivered with false sympathy, but the trap was obvious. Mrs. Astor was inviting her to either defend her father's actions or distance herself from him. Either response would be used against her. Serafina took a careful breath. "My father made grave mistakes, Mrs. Astor. Mistakes that hurt many people and brought shame to our family. I cannot defend his actions, nor would I attempt to. But I can say that I have spent the past years trying to live a life of integrity to prove that character is not solely determined by bloodline." "Indeed," Mrs. Astor replied, her expression unreadable. "And your brother, I believe, is currently in Paris, under rather unfortunate circumstances." Around them, the other women leaned forward imperceptibly. "My brother made his own mistakes," Serafina said evenly. "He is paying the price for them in exile. I pray daily that he will find his way back to honor." "How admirably loyal," Mrs. Astor observed, "though one must wonder if such loyalty is entirely wise. After all, we are judged by the company we keep, even if that company is family." Before Serafina could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "I disagree, Mrs. Astor." Every head turned. Madeline Pierce, whom Serafina had noticed sitting quietly in the corner, rose to her feet. She was a handsome woman of about 28, dressed more simply than the others, with intelligent, brown eyes and an air of quiet confidence. "Miss Pierce," Mrs. Astor said with barely concealed frost, "I wasn't aware you had been invited to contribute to this conversation." "Forgive me," Madeline replied, not sounding sorry at all. "But I couldn't help but notice that Miss Ashmont is being interrogated about her family's sins as though they were her own. I wonder if we're applying that standard universally." The room went deathly silent. "I'm not certain I understand your meaning, Miss Pierce," Mrs. Astor said, her voice dangerously soft. "I mean that if we're judging Miss Ashmont by her relatives' mistakes, we should be equally rigorous with everyone present. Shall we discuss Mrs. Pemberton's uncle, who embezzled from his church? Or perhaps Miss Aldridge's grandfather, whose fortune was built on the opium trade? Or even your own father, Mrs. Astor, who began as a butcher before buying his way into society?" Gasps erupted around the room. Several women clutched their pearls. Mrs. Pemberton's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "Miss Pierce," Mrs. Astor said icily, "I think you forget yourself." "On the contrary, I think I remember quite clearly. I'm a journalist, Mrs. Astor. I research facts for a living. And the fact is that nearly every family in this room has skeletons in their closets. The only difference is that Miss Ashmont's skeletons are public knowledge, while yours remain carefully hidden. I'm simply suggesting that we apply the same standards to everyone, or admit that this interrogation is less about morality and more about cruelty to someone you perceive as vulnerable." The silence that followed was absolute. Serafina sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. She had no idea who this woman was or why she had chosen to defend her. Mrs. Astor studied Madeline for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You make a fair point, Miss Pierce, though I don't appreciate having it made quite so forcefully in my own home." She turned back to Serafina, and her expression softened slightly. "Miss Ashmont, I apologize if my questions seemed harsh. Tell me instead about yourself. What do you read? What interests you?" The shift was so sudden that Serafina needed a moment to collect herself. I, I read philosophy primarily. Mary Wollstonecraft, John Stuart Mill. I'm particularly interested in Mill's arguments about individual liberty and the role of women in society." "Ah," Mrs. Astor said, and there was genuine interest in her voice now. "And what is your opinion of Mill's work?" For the next hour, Serafina found herself engaged in a surprisingly substantive discussion. Other women joined in, and while some seemed merely curious, others, including Madeline Pierce, contributed genuine insights. By the time the tea concluded, Serafina's initial terror had transformed into cautious optimism. Mrs. Astor had not explicitly endorsed her, but she had not rejected her either. And she had gained an unexpected ally in Madeline Pierce. As the ladies prepared to depart, Madeline approached Serafina quietly. "Miss Ashmont, might I have a word in private?" They stepped into a quiet corner of the entrance hall. I wanted to introduce myself properly, Madeline said, extending her hand. I'm Madeline Pierce. I write for the New York World, though I was here today in a social capacity. I hope I didn't overstep by defending you. Overstep, Serafina grasped her hand warmly. You saved me from humiliation. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks necessary. I can't stand hypocrites. She paused, then continued more seriously. But I also have an ulterior motive for seeking you out. I'd like to propose something. I'm listening. I've been investigating Senator Aldridge Genevieve's father for several months now. He's deeply corrupt, taking bribes from railroad companies, manipulating stock prices using his political position for personal gain. I have evidence, but I need more to make the story bulletproof, and I believe you and Mr. Ravencrest might be able to help me. Serafina felt a chill. Why would you think that? Because Senator Aldridge is terrified of Mr. Ravencrest's influence. If Ravencrest marries you, he'll have the sympathy of progressive reformers for courting a woman society rejected while maintaining the loyalty of old money. That makes him politically untouchable. The senator wants his daughter to marry Ravencrest specifically to prevent that outcome, to gain control over Ravencrest's railroad empire through family connection. But Dominic is courting me, not Genevieve. Exactly, which is why Aldridge will try to destroy your courtship. He'll dig up every piece of dirt he can find on your family manufacture scandals if necessary, unless we strike first. What are you proposing? An alliance, Madeline said simply. You, Mr. Ravencrest and myself, I help protect you from Aldridge's attacks, and in return, when you become Mrs. Ravencrest, you help me establish a newspaper dedicated to real journalism, investigating corruption, promoting reform, giving women a voice. We fight for each other and for something larger than ourselves. Before Serafina could respond, her aunt appeared, but Madeline pressed a card into her hand. Think about it and discuss it with Mr. Ravencrest. I believe we could do great things together. That evening, Dominic called for what had become his daily visit. When Serafina told him about Madeline's proposal, his reaction surprised her. She's right, he said immediately. Aldridge is exactly the kind of man who would destroy you to get to me. I've been trying to figure out how to protect you from him, and an alliance with a journalist who has damaging information might be exactly what we need. But it feels so calculated. Is it mercenary to pretend yourself? Is it mercenary to fight corruption? We'd be forming an alliance to accomplish good things, exposing a corrupt politician, establishing a platform for truth, protecting our ability to choose our own path. That's not mercenary. That's strategic. He took her hands. Serafina, I need you to understand something. I'm not just courting you because I find you intellectually stimulating, though I do. I'm courting you because I'm falling in love with you. And that means I'll do whatever it takes to protect our chance at happiness. Her breath caught. You're falling in love with me. Yes, Dominic said simply. I know it's only been a week. I know it's too soon to say such things. But I promised you honesty. Every day I spend with you, every conversation we have, I fall a little more in love with you. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm just telling you the truth of my feelings so you'll understand why I'm willing to fight for this. For us. That night, Serafina allowed herself to truly consider that she was falling in love as well. The way her heart raced when she heard his voice. The way she found herself thinking about him at odd moments. The way she felt most herself when they were engaged in their philosophical debates. Was this love or gratitude for being seen? She didn't have an answer yet, but she knew she wanted the chance to find out. The following week brought an unexpected development. A letter arrived from Paris addressed to Serafina in her brother's familiar hand. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Dearest Sarah, word of your courtship has reached even here. I am happy for you truly, but I must warn you, Senator Aldridge came to Paris last month. He met with me privately, offered me $10,000 to return to New York and remind everyone of the Ashmont shame. I refused, but I know he'll find someone who won't. He's terrified of Ravencrest's political influence. Aldridge wants his daughter to marry Ravencrest so he can control the railroad empire. Be careful, sister. They will try to destroy this, and they'll use me to do it. But here's something you should know. I'm coming home, not for Aldridge's money, because you deserve someone in your corner, and I've been a coward long enough. I'm ready to face the consequences of my actions. I'm ready to stand trial, serve my sentence, and try to rebuild some measure of honor. I arrive in New York on the 23rd. Don't tell anyone. Let me surprise them. Your loving brother, Cassian. Serafina read the letter 3 times, emotions warring within her. Joy that her brother still loved her. Fear of what his return would mean. and a strange sense of hope that perhaps her family wasn't entirely beyond redemption. She showed the letter to Dominic that evening. "This could destroy us," she said quietly. "When Cassian returns, when the scandal is resurrected, society will turn on me again. You could still walk away, Dominic, before it's too late." Dominic read the letter carefully, then set it aside and took both her hands. "Serafina, look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his steady gaze. "Do you think I'm courting you in ignorance of your family's history? I've known about your father's fraud, your brother's exile, your mother's affair, since before I asked you to dance. I knew all of it, and I chose you anyway. But when Cassian returns, when your brother returns, we'll face it together, as allies, as partners, and yes, Serafina, as people who are falling in love. I won't abandon you because your brother finally found the courage to take responsibility for his mistakes. In fact, I admire him for it. You admire him. Yes, it takes real courage to face the consequences of your actions. Your brother has been in exile for years. He could have stayed in Paris indefinitely. Instead, he's choosing to come home, stand trial, and try to make amends. That's the action of a man who still has integrity beneath his mistakes." He paused. "And it tells me something important about your family. They raised two children who understand honor and responsibility. You who have maintained your dignity through years of cruelty, and Cassian who is finally ready to face justice. That's not nothing, Serafina." "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "You keep saying that as though my affection is some sort of prize you need to earn. But that's not how love works. I don't love you because you're perfect. I love you because you're real. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I can be my authentic self rather than the role society expects me to play." "You love me." "Yes," Dominic said simply. "I love you. I know it's only been 2 weeks. I know it's absurdly fast, but I've spent 5 years in lonely isolation, and I know the difference between interest and love. This is love, Serafina, and I need to know, is there any chance you might feel the same?" Tears streamed down her face. For years she had been invisible, unloved, convinced she was unworthy of affection. And here was this extraordinary man telling her he loved her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Dominic, I love you too. I'm terrified of it, terrified of hoping, but I love you." The kiss that followed was nothing like the chaste touches that had marked their earlier interactions. This was real and passionate and full of promise. Dominic's hands framed her face gently, and Serafina felt overwhelmed by the intensity of emotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. "We need to prepare," he said quietly. "Cassian arrives in 4 days. We need to have Madeline ready with her exposé. We need to be strategically positioned for when Aldridge makes his move." "What are you suggesting?" "A meeting tomorrow, you, me, and Madeline. We plan this carefully, we control the narrative, and we protect what we're building together." The following afternoon, Dominic, Serafina, and Madeline met in Dominic's private study. The mood was serious, focused. "Aldridge will attack at the Patriarch's ball," Madeline said, spreading papers across the desk. "It's 3 weeks away, the biggest social event of the season. He'll use it as his stage to publicly destroy Serafina's reputation, hoping to force Dominic to end the courtship." "What evidence do you have on him?" Dominic asked. "Gambling debts totaling $200,000 to French syndicates, bribes from 3 different railroad companies, stock manipulation that made him a fortune while ruining small investors, and," she paused dramatically, "ledgers from a Paris gambling house that detail every cent he's lost over the past 5 years." "How did you get those?" Serafina asked. "Your brother," Madeline said simply. "Cassian worked as an accountant for several Paris casinos after his exile. He kept copies of everything, including Aldridge's records. He's bringing them home with him." "So we have leverage," Dominic said thoughtfully. "More than leverage, we have a nuclear option. But we need to time it perfectly. We let Aldridge make his attack at the ball. We let him think he's winning. And then we destroy him publicly with evidence he can't refute." "And Genevieve?" Serafina asked quietly. "Collateral damage," Madeline said bluntly. "She's been complicit in her father's schemes, using her beauty to manipulate potential business partners. She knew exactly what she was doing when she pursued Dominic. I have no sympathy for her." Over the next 3 weeks, they laid their plans carefully. Dominic continued his public courtship of Serafina, making their attachment increasingly obvious. Madeline worked her journalistic contacts, preparing her exposé, but holding it back. And they waited for Cassian's return. He arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon, stepping off the ship from Le Havre, looking older than his 35 years, but with a new steadiness in his bearing. Serafina met him at the docks, and when she saw him, she ran to him without caring who was watching. They embraced for a long moment, both crying. I'm so sorry, Cassian said, for everything, for what I did to our family, for leaving you to face the consequences alone. You're here now, Serafina said. That's what matters. That evening, Cassian met Dominic for the first time in Serafina's modest drawing room. The two men sized each other up carefully. Mr. Ravencrest, Cassian said, extending his hand, I know what you're thinking. Can this gambling exile be trusted around your future wife? Fair question. Actually, Dominic said, shaking his hand firmly, I'm thinking, can you help us destroy Senator Aldridge? Because I have a plan, and I believe you're the key to it. Cassian's eyes lit up with something like hope. I brought the ledgers. Everything Aldridge lost in Paris. Every bribe he took. Every rule he broke. It's all documented. Perfect, Dory, Dominic said. Then let me tell you what we're going to do. The night of the Patriarch's ball arrived with unseasonable warmth. The Delmonico's ballroom was packed, with over 300 guests, all of New York society gathered for the event of the season. Serafina arrived on Dominic's arm wearing a gown of emerald silk that transformed her into someone she barely recognized. The pearls at her throat, a gift from Dominic, caught the candlelight. Her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had taken hours. The whispers began the moment they entered. Still courting her? 3 weeks now. He must be serious. Genevieve Aldridge stood near the center of the room in a gown of gold silk, her blonde hair gleaming. When she saw Serafina, her expression hardened. For the first hour, everything proceeded normally. Dominic danced with Serafina, twice a clear declaration of serious intent. They spoke with various guests, endured curious questions with practiced grace. And then Senator Aldridge made his move. He stood in the center of the ballroom and called for attention. The orchestra fell silent. 300 people turned to listen. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying clearly. I apologize for the interruption, but I feel I must speak. For weeks we have watched Mr. Ravencrest court Miss Ashmont, and many have wondered at this choice. Tonight I feel compelled to share information that I believe everyone deserves to know. Serafina felt Dominic's hand tighten on hers. You see, Aldridge continued, I have recently learned some disturbing facts about the Ashmont family. Facts that Miss Ashmont has been concealing from Mr. Ravencrest and from all of you. He produced a sheaf of papers with theatrical flourish. Miss Ashmont's brother Cassian didn't just cheat at cards and flee to Paris. He embezzled $50,000 from his own father's business to cover gambling debts. Money that could have saved the family fortune. And Miss Ashmont knew about it. She helped him hide it. She's been lying to all of you, and particularly to Mr. Ravencrest, hoping to trap him into marriage before he learned the truth. The ballroom erupted in gasps and scandalized whispers. Every face turned towards Serafina with expressions ranging from shock to vindication to cruel satisfaction. Serafina stood frozen. This was it, the moment she had feared. Public humiliation on the grandest stage possible. But before she could react, before the shame could overwhelm her, Cassian Ashmont stepped forward from the crowd. Senator Aldridge is right, he said, his voice clear and strong. I did embezzle that money. I was 22, addicted to gambling and desperate. My father discovered the theft, and that's what drove him to take his own life, not the stock scandal alone, but the betrayal by his own son. He turned to face the crowd directly. But here's what the senator didn't tell you: my sister knew nothing about it. She was 18, innocent of my crimes. When she discovered the truth years later, she begged me to turn myself in. I refused because I was a coward. Cassian turned to address the police detective he had alerted to attend the ball. Officer Brennan, I'm here to confess. I'm ready to face trial for embezzlement and fraud. I'll serve whatever sentence the court deems appropriate. But first, let me say this. He looked directly at Senator Aldridge. You tried to bribe me in Paris with $10,000 to destroy my sister's happiness. I have the bank transfer records. You're investigating me for fraud. How about we investigate your gambling debts? The $200,000 you owe to French syndicates, or the railroad stocks you manipulated last year, making a fortune while small investors lost everything. Aldridge's face went pale. You have no proof. Don't I? Cassian held up a leather folder. I worked as an accountant for 3 Paris casinos. I have copies of every ledger, every debt, every shady transaction. I kept them as insurance, never thinking I'd actually use them. But you threatened my sister, and that was a mistake. Madeline Pierce stepped forward, holding up a newspaper. Tomorrow's New York World headline, she announced, her voice ringing through the stunned silence. Senator Aldridge's double-life gambling debt and corruption. We have testimony from 12 sources. We have financial records. We have photographs of you entering illegal gambling halls. Your political career is over, Senator. Aldridge stood speechless, his face cycling through emotions, shock, rage, fear. You can't. This is justice, Dominic said, stepping forward. You tried to destroy an innocent woman to serve your own political ambitions. You failed. He turned to Serafina, taking both her hands in his. Then in front of 300 witnesses, Dominic Ravencrest got down on one knee. Serafina Ashmont, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. You are the bravest, most brilliant woman I've ever known. I don't want a business arrangement. I don't want social advantage. I want you, as my wife, my partner, my equal. Will you marry me? The ballroom held its collective breath. Serafina looked down at him, this powerful man kneeling before her, declaring his love in front of everyone who had ever scorned her. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Dominic, I'll marry you. The kiss that followed was witnessed by 300 people and would be talked about for years to come. And when they finally broke apart to Serafina's utter astonishment, the ballroom erupted in applause. Mrs. Astor herself stood surprising everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her authoritative voice cutting through the noise. I believe we have just witnessed something rare, genuine love triumphing over social convention. Mr. Ravencrest and Miss Ashmont have my complete support and blessing. When Caroline Astor gave her approval, society had no choice but to follow. Senator Aldridge and Genevieve fled the ballroom in disgrace. By morning, the senator's resignation letter would be on the governor's desk, and Genevieve would find herself persona non grata in the very society she had once dominated. But Serafina barely noticed. She was too busy being held by Dominic, too overwhelmed by the reality that she had won. They had won. The invisible woman was invisible no more. The wedding took place 4 weeks later at St. Patrick's Cathedral. 150 guests. Only people who genuinely supported them filled the pews. Cassian attended out on bail awaiting trial. Madeline served as bridesmaid. Lady Thornwell sobbed with joy throughout the ceremony. Serafina wore a gown of ivory silk with a train that seemed to go on forever. But the most beautiful part wasn't the dress, it was the look in Dominic's eyes as she walked down the aisle. They had written their own vows, breaking with tradition, even in this. Alexander Dominic Ravencrest. Serafina said, her voice clear and strong. I promise to be your ally in all things, to challenge you when you're wrong, support you when you're right, and partner with you in building something larger than ourselves. I will never make myself small to make you comfortable. And I promise that you will never be alone again. Serafina Marie Ashmont, Dominic replied. I promise to see you always, not as ornament, not as dependent, but as equal. To protect your autonomy while defending your honor. To be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. You are my partner, my ally, my love, and I will spend my life proving that I was right to choose you. When they kissed as husband and wife, the cathedral erupted in applause. The honeymoon was spent at Dominic's Newport estate, 3 days of blessed privacy away from New York's curious eyes. On their wedding night, Serafina discovered that intimacy with someone who truly knew you, who valued you, was entirely different from what she had imagined. I've never, she began nervously. We're partners, remember? Dominic said gently. We figure it out together. No performance. Just us. The next morning, Serafina woke in Dominic's arms wearing his shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. He was already awake watching her with an expression of such tenderness as it made her heart ache. How does it feel, he asked softly, to wake up visible? Like coming home, she replied. They spent those 3 days talking about everything and nothing, about politics and philosophy and their plans for the future, about the school they would build together using Dominic's fortune and Serafina's vision. I have a confession, Serafina said on the second day. I've been secretly funding 2 schools for the past 3 years, small ones for daughters of railroad workers and factory employees. I used money from investments I made with my pin money. Dominic stared at her. You did what? I taught myself about stocks and bonds, made some smart investments. Nothing compared to your fortune, but enough to rent 2 buildings and hire teachers. I wanted to do something meaningful, even if no one knew about it. Us, Serafina, Dominic said, pulling her close. You never cease to amaze me. We're expanding those schools. 10 more locations within 2 years, 20 within 5. We'll create a network of education that changes lives. Partners, she asked. Partners, he confirmed. Their first challenge as a married couple came sooner than expected. Dominic's stepmother, Beatrice Blackwood, arrived in New York 1 week after the wedding, demanding to see them. The meeting took place in the drawing room of their new home, a beautiful townhouse on Fifth Avenue that Dominic had purchased as a wedding gift. Beatrice was 55, dressed entirely in black, with cold eyes and a colder manner. "Alexander," she said without preamble, "I've come to discuss your unfortunate marriage." "There's nothing unfortunate about it, Mother," Dominic replied calmly. "Don't be absurd. This woman has no fortune, no family worth speaking of, and brings nothing but scandal to our name. This woman," Serafina said quietly standing, "is your daughter-in-law, and I'd appreciate it if you'd address me directly rather than speaking about me as though I'm not present." Beatrice's eyebrows rose. "How dare you? How dare I what? Expect basic courtesy. I'm sorry if that's too much to ask, but I won't be invisible in my own home." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other. Then Beatrice did something unexpected. She laughed. "You have spine. I'll give you that." She turned to Dominic. "Very well. I came prepared to demand you annul this marriage. But I can see you've chosen someone who won't let you become complacent. Perhaps that's not entirely terrible." "Does this mean you accept our marriage?" Dominic asked cautiously. "It means I won't actively oppose it," Beatrice replied. "On one condition, this woman must prove she can handle the responsibilities of your position. I'm putting her on the board of the Ravencrest Foundation. If she fails, I reserve the right to say I told you so for the rest of eternity." "And if she succeeds," Serafina asked, "then I'll donate $100,000 to whatever charitable project you're building together." It was a test, clearly, but it was also an opportunity. "Done," Serafina said, extending her hand. Beatrice shook it with a grip like iron. 2 months after the wedding, Cassian's trial took place. The courtroom was packed with spectators curious to see the resolution of the Ashmont scandal. Serafina attended every day, sitting in the front row with Dominic at her side. She testified as a character witness, speaking with legal precision and emotional power about her brother's journey toward redemption. The judge, swayed by Cassian's voluntary confession and genuine remorse, sentenced him to 2 years in prison with eligibility for parole in 18 months. He would also complete an education program and provide community service teaching accounting to immigrants. "Thank you," Cassian said to Serafina as he was led away, "for not giving up on me." "We're family," she replied. "We don't give up on each other." 1 year after the wedding, Serafina stood at the podium of the newly opened Blackwood Ashmont Academy for Girls in Brooklyn. 200 girls had enrolled in the tuition-free school. Behind her on the stage sat Dominic Madeline, Lady Thornwell, and even Beatrice, who had made good on her promise of $100,000. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote, Serafina began, her voice carrying clearly, "I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves. This school is not charity, it's justice. These girls deserve the same intellectual tools that boys receive, not to compete with men, but to be sovereign over their own lives." She paused, looking at the faces of the girls in the audience, daughters of railroad workers, factory employees, immigrants, the poor and forgotten. "My husband and I built this together as partners. That's the model we want to show you: collaboration, not domination; respect, not submission; alliance." The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, as they rode back to their home, Serafina turned to Dominic with news she had been saving. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. 2 months. The joy that blazed across his face made her heart sing. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Is this what you want?" "Terrified," she admitted. "But yes, with you, yes." "We'll raise them as equals," Dominic said. "Son or daughter, they'll have the same education, the same opportunities, the same freedom to choose their own path." "A legacy of partnership," Serafina agreed. "A legacy of love," Dominic added, pulling her close. 5 years later, Serafina stood on the terrace of their Newport estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. At her feet, her daughter Octavia, 4 years old and named after her great-aunt, sat reading a book of philosophy, already showing signs of her mother's intellectual bent. Inside, she could hear her son Cassian, 2 years old and named after her brother who had served his time, and now managed the foundation's finances with impeccable integrity, playing with building blocks. And beneath her hand rested the swell of her third pregnancy, due in 3 months. Dominic emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. At 44, with more silver in his hair, but the same steady gray eyes, he was more handsome than ever. "Mama," Octavia asked, looking up from her book, "why do you and Papa always call each other partner?" Serafina smiled, exchanging a glance with Dominic. "Because that's what we are, sweetheart. We're allies. We make decisions together, fight battles together, build things together." "Your mama taught me," Dominic added, settling beside them, "that love isn't about ownership. It's about choosing each other every day, as equals." When I grow up, Octavia declared, I want a partner too. Then I've done my job, Serafina said softly. The Blackwood Ashmont Academy Network had expanded to 12 schools across 5 cities. 5,000 girls had received education who otherwise would have had none. 3 graduates had gone on to women's colleges, the first in their families to attend university. Cassian, fully rehabilitated, had married a kind school teacher and now had 2 children of his own. He visited often, and the relationship between brother and sister had healed completely. Madeline edited The Women's Voice, a newspaper that had become one of the most respected sources of investigative journalism in the country. She had broken a dozen major corruption stories and was rumored to be considering a run for office herself. Senator Aldridge had died in obscurity in California, his political career destroyed. Genevieve had married a merchant of moderate means and lived a quiet life, reportedly bitter about what might have been. But Serafina rarely thought about them anymore. Her life was too full of joy to waste time on old enemies. Do you remember, Dominic said as they watched the sunset together, that day in the lawyer's office, when I first asked you to dance? I remember thinking you would realize your mistake and walk away, Serafina admitted. I remember thinking this woman is exactly what I've been searching for. How has no one seen it? You made me visible, Dominic. No love. I just had the sense to open my eyes. You were visible all along to anyone willing to look. Serafina leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. Years invisible, she mused. 10 years visible. I'll take those odds. I'll take every year you give me, Dominic replied. Partner. Partner, Serafina echoed. Always. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the world in shades of gold and rose, Serafina reflected on her journey. From the invisible spinster in the corner of the ballroom to the woman building schools and changing lives. From the scorned outcast to the beloved wife and mother. They had said she was unmarriageable, invisible, broken by scandal. But they were wrong. She hadn't been broken. She had been forged. Years of fire had made her steel. And when the right man came along, one who valued mind over beauty, character over status, partnership over possession, he hadn't seen damage. He had seen possibility. This was her story. But it was also the story of every woman told she wasn't enough. Every girl made invisible by circumstance. They were never invisible. The world just needed better eyes. And once they were seen, they changed everything. The unmarriageable spinster had become a wife, a mother, a philanthropist, a builder of legacies. But most importantly, she had become a partner. And together they had built something that would outlast them both. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Serafina smiled. Her daughter read philosophy at her feet. Her son played nearby. Her husband held her hand. And beneath her heart, new life grew. This was happiness. This was home. This was the reward for having the courage to step out of the shadows and into the light. The invisible woman had become unforgettable, and she would never, ever be invisible again.